Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Sean Ellis with us. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thanks, Bronson. It's good to finally get on here.
I know we've been trying to get you on for quite some time now, and for good reason. You're actually the individual that coined the term growth hacker. So if it wasn't for you, this product would be named something totally different. But let me give a little intro about you for the people that maybe aren't as familiar with you. You've led marketing at two companies that had an IPO, LogMeIn and Uproar. You were the first marketer at Dropbox, Lookout, Zobni, and you've had important growth roles at many other companies, and now you're the founder of Qualaroo. Does that all sound about right?
Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, so you seem to be pretty busy.
Yeah, definitely, especially in the founder role now. I think it's my busiest time yet, but it's really? A good time.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that later. So being a founder is more busy than leading growth at all those other companies?
Yeah, because it's you wear a lot of hats as a founder, and so I don't have nearly as much time to focus on growth, and growth is the most fun, but but ultimately you got to do it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we'll talk about Qualaroo towards the end a little bit, but before we get to that, I want to talk about kind of the knowledge you've acquired leading up to this newest venture, because you had so much exposure to so many different companies, and your exposure was really focused on growth. You were able to come in and really focus on that piece of the puzzle. So you've kind of developed a philosophy, a framework, a way of thinking about it that's more developed than most people, I think. So I really want to try to get inside your mind a little bit. But first, I heard you say something in a presentation once. You said that you think the first 6 months of a company matters for growth the most. Why is that? Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't know that it matters the most for growth in all companies. It was really an observation that I'd made on the two companies where I had run marketing for about 5 years each. The two companies that had gone public, the first two marketing roles I had, and it was really in the second one where I looked back and said, what was the most important stage in the company, kind of getting to this point where we had just filed to go public at that point, and it was really, when I look back at those companies, it was really the first 6 months. So it was really the first 6 months of once the product was released. And in both cases, we got pretty lucky that both products were pretty close to product market fit right out of the gate. Mm-hmm. So I probably would refine it as saying the first 6 months after product market fit are the most important for growth. But in my situation, in those two companies, it was really those first 6 months of when I was consciously thinking about growth in those companies.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Let's actually jump into the product market fit a little bit, because that's something you've really brought to the conversation with a lot of emphasis. And I have people on this show often, they talk about, we're pre-product market fit, we're post-product market fit. And I know that you got some of those thoughts from, I think, Mark Andreessen, but you're really the one to refine it and really go further with it. But let's back up one step before that, and let's talk about the startup marketing pyramid, because this pyramid seems to be your philosophy of how you kind of arrange all the stuff you've learned. Is that fair enough, you think?
Yeah, I think it's a way of kind of looking at some of the milestones that instead of like that question of the first 6 months, mm-hmm. It's much more milestone oriented. So if it may take a company 2 years to get to product market fit after their initial release, and mm-hmm. if it takes 2 years, then you don't want to kind of think of it time based. You want to think of it more milestone based. So that's the pyramid's all about. Getting to product market fit is at the base of the pyramid. Mm-hmm. Next level is a bunch of things that you're doing, preparing for growth, transitioning to growth, mm-hmm. and then finally it's the ongoing execution of driving growth. But a lot of that formula takes place in the middle stage, and then you're not really in a position to think about growth until you have product market fit.
Yeah, no, that's great. Well, let's start at kind of the base a little bit with product market fit. Define for us product market fit. What is it in your terminology?
So it is something that's always been pretty abstract. So I think if you look at anybody who's spent a lot of time around startups and driving success in startups, they all have different ways of saying product market fit. More and more, I think the terminology is focusing on product market fit, but Sequoia talks a lot about just, you need to create a must-have product. The term product market fit, I think first time I read it was on Mark Andreessen's blog. But Y Combinator, Paul Graham talks about make products people want, make something people want. Steve Blank talks about validating that the product solves a real problem or meets a need. So you have all these people that have kind of talked about the same idea, and it makes logical sense that if you don't have a product that meets a need and meets a need for a large group of people, then you have a really hard time growing a business around that product. So so if I narrowed it down to a specific definition, I would just say it's a must-have for a segment of users that reflects a reasonably sized market that you could build a business around.
Yeah, and you give a presentation once, and one of the slides when you talk about this point is like a rock star on stage, and all these people in the crowd kind of like grabbing at them and holding their hands up, trying to get toward them. And that image really stuck with me. Like, must-have product. You want to be the Beatles. Like, it doesn't have to be that big, but you want people to really want what it is you're doing, and that kind of made it click for me. I think the easiest.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so it definitely has to have passion around it, because I think that founders tend to be a little bit sort of manic. That's probably a good way of saying it. That one day we're taking over the world, and the next day, oh, what the hell am I doing? This is so stupid. And depending on the lens that you're looking through, the same information can look great or look bad, and so you can be pretty delusional as a founder. So I try to take it down to like a very specific metric, but that metric is really reflecting that it has to be a must-have. A nice-to-have is not enough. It's not, a nice-to-have basically doesn't. The world doesn't need more nice-to-have products. There's just so many choices for people that if it's a must-have product, you have a fighting chance. If it's a nice-to-have product, you really don't have much of a chance. And so I basically took it down to a single survey question that helped me gauge whether it's a must-have or a nice-to-have. And it's just asking people kind of the inverse. How would you feel if you couldn't use the product anymore? And if people said very disappointed, then that reflects really must-have. If they said somewhat disappointed, that's kind of more of a nice-to-have. And it was interesting in the early days when I showed companies the data on running that question, they always gravitate toward, wow, 86% of my users say that they would be disappointed without my product. They just merged those two numbers, and it might have been that 80% said somewhat disappointed and only 6% said very disappointed. Yeah. And I basically told them, ignore the somewhat disappointed. Focus only on the very disappointed, because the very disappointed are the only people that really matter. And I compared that across a lot of different companies and basically found that you needed about 40% of your users saying that they'd be very disappointed without the product before you could really grow the company. And that was sort of a post-fact looking backwards where I basically said, okay, let me take all the successful companies that I've been involved with, and whether it's working officially with them or just getting to know them and running that question against their user base and comparing the answers to that question versus the ones that were flailing and maybe not working as well. And I found that kind of that magic place where companies seem to get traction and grow consistently was when 40% of their users said they'd be very disappointed without the product.
Yeah, that's a great number to keep in mind. Now, let me ask you this question, though. That assumes you have a product. It assumes that you're able to send out kind of a questionnaire, and you have users that have used it enough to know how disappointed they would be. But a lot of startups, they're in the idea phase, or they're getting ready to build an MVP. Is there any advice you can give us about how to know if we're in the right direction of product market fit before there's even a product or an MVP? Or is that just not possible? Do you just have to have something before you can know?
Well, so first of all, like, to have the guts to start a company, you basically have to ignore all the doubters because everyone's a doubter around you in the beginning. They all think you're crazy to be taking the leap, and it kind of causes you to ignore bad information and to be really overconfident in what you're trying to do, and you sort of need to be, because otherwise you wouldn't do it. But so it's kind of this really tough stage. But what I find is when I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, when I ask them, well, why does the world need that thing that you're creating? They state as fact a bunch of things that may or may not be true. And and that ultimately, if those premises are wrong, you're going to waste a lot of time building the product. It's a lot easier to actually just have some conversations with your target users and challenge the premises, not from the perspective of like, oh, I won't do this product at all based on the feedback, but at least looking at it from the perspective of, well, I'm going to kind of tweak how I do this product based on the feedback. So what you're really trying to find out is, one, is the problem that you're solving, is the reason you think the world needs this product, is it actually true? So you're not actually out trying to sell the product or the vision of the product. You're actually just trying to kind of challenge your base assumptions on why you think the product will be successful. And so if people aren't having the problem or not really having the problem, or they don't really care about solving the problem, then you probably want to rethink the business a little bit. Maybe they have the problem, but they've already got a great solution. Then you want to at least make sure that you're solving it in a different way, in a way that will hopefully be superior. But ultimately, I think just the key is that those conversations with your target users are going to make you a lot more informed, so that when you do build something, you're building it in line with what the world needs, and just way cheaper. I mean, it's really, I think it's kind of the whole lean startup approach. It's really about avoiding big money wasting efforts. So don't build something nobody needs. If your base assumptions are wrong, it's really cheap to just go out and have some conversations first. And then secondly, once you've built it, you don't want to just go straight to trying to grow it, which is what a lot of people did in the past, and which I probably did in the beginning too. I just got lucky that the companies actually created products that fit a need. But if it's really expensive to try to grow a product, and so it's much cheaper to find out if the product that you created is actually something people need. So it's really about sort of figuring out the cheap lessons while they're still cheap, and not sort of spending a lot on marketing or spending a lot on building a team to build a product, if in fact at the base of the pyramid really is, I mean, before product market fit would be base assumptions. If you're going to have a 4-level pyramid, the bottom part would be, validate base assumptions.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. So you kind of start with the product market fit at the base of the pyramid, like we've been talking about. And then next, you say you move into the transition to growth. And like you said, you want to make sure you have PM fit first, so you're not wasting a bunch of money and a bunch of time, because this stage is hard. You're going to spend a lot of resources to make this happen in terms of personnel, energy, money, whatever. And so as you transition to growth, now we know that a lot of people, at least 40%, need this product. They are going to be very disappointed if they don't have it. But how do we actually uncover the must-have experience? Because we know they really want it, but maybe they want it for different reasons, right? So what do we do to really learn what that must-have experience is for your users?
So I'll go into that in a second. I'm going to sort of take a little step back and actually sort of come to how I figured that out.
Yeah, please.
Which is basically so after I left my last long-term marketing role, I knew I was going to do a bunch of roles in the first 6 months to really try to kind of figure out what was important, and what sort of execution steps were important, and what I really was trying to figure out is which of those opportunities are just, I don't have a chance. Which of those opportunities are just going to waste my time. And ultimately, I looked at, okay, so I have to figure out how to grow the company, and that's really what I'm bringing to the table. I also have to figure out how to make sure that people can experience the product in a way that is good. But ultimately, the thing I don't have a whole lot of control over as a marketer, I didn't have a whole lot of control over, was whether the product was important to people or not. Whether if nobody likes the product, I could be the best marketer in the world, and I'm going to fail every single time. So a lot of the stuff I basically figured out more as a sort of failure prevention of just basically going in and knowing that what situation am I screwed in? Which situation do I not have a chance? Okay. And so first thing I wanted to do was figure out, do people actually care about this product? If nobody wants it, I will fail. But I basically figured out if people want it, then everything else is within my control. And so then I feel like I can execute my way into helping companies shape that first user experience so that people can get to the great experience that the product can deliver. But ultimately, then the next step is really trying to understand what is that great experience. So it's a lot of just drilling into existing users of the product and focusing on why would they be very disappointed without the product. And the more that I kind of understand the experience and what makes it a must-have, the more that I'm really trying to kind of narrow that down to a kernel and understand that on the deepest level possible. And everything else that I'm doing from that point forward is about delivering that must-have experience.
I gotcha.
And so growth channels are about getting more people who could benefit from it to experience it. And then everything else is really about just fine-tuning the delivery of that.
No, that makes a lot of sense, because once you know that, you know the main thing that people care about. So now you're just optimizing for that. Every flow is about that. Every funnel is about that. Every inbound channel is about that. That's the thing you got to get them connected with, right?
Right. The unique asset, the basically product market fit is this elusive asset that most startups who fail never created. And so once you've created it, then everything else is about that product market fit, is about understanding it, articulating it, highlighting it, surfacing it, making sure that it's accessible, and then connecting it with your target users.
Yeah, just to make sure everybody listening or watching this is really clear, give us maybe one example of a must-have experience. It could be from a product you worked on or just any product, just to make sure we're all super clear of what kind of thing would be considered a must-have experience.
So I'll give you an example just from Log Me In, the kind of last long-term role that I was in a marketing role. When we first tried to grow that product, I had a lot of positive feedback from our investors and others that I was signing up thousands of users a day for that product. But when I actually studied the funnel, I could see that majority of users fell off somewhere before they actually came in and did a remote control session. So in case you're not familiar with what Log Me In is, it's you install the software on your computer, and then you can go to any other computer and easily remote control your computer and get files off of it and essentially work as if you were sitting in front of that computer. But what I found is that a lot of people will call it vanity metrics. A lot of the vanity metrics, like signups or even downloads, ultimately didn't matter if they didn't go in and remote control a computer. And Log Me In was a unique case because there's so many steps that you need to take before you ultimately are remote controlling a computer, including after you've set it all up, you have to go to a different computer and then remote control it, and then you're like, wow, this is great. I can't live without this thing. And maybe even you can't live without it until it's not just that first time that you do it, but it's that first time that you are, on the other side of the city or the other side of the country, and you really need something off your computer, and oh, thank God it was on there, and now you can remote control it, and you get it. That might be the time that you say this is a must-have. But it's ultimately kind of defining what the experience is and the benefit of that experience, and that ultimately becomes kind of the kernel of what you're trying to build a delivery engine around.
Yeah, so as a marketer, you're really focused on the KPI for you is connecting people to that must-have experience, not just sign-ups or any other part of the flow. It has to be getting them to have the experience, because that's when they become, rabid fans about what's going on here. So that's a great example.
Right. All of your value indicators in the business, whether it's retention, whether it's revenue, whether it's word of mouth, it's just everything that ultimately creates value in your business is directly correlated to delivering that must-have experience.
Yeah, no, that's a great.
And a lot of times people will think about the sort of a sales cycle. I don't know what my ROI is until they get through the trial period and everything else. But what I find is it becomes very easy to model an ROI based on the number of people that reach the must-have experience, because most of the numbers become pretty consistent deeper down the funnel there.
Yeah, no, that's great. So not only is it, the key metric you're looking at, it's also the key indicator to what's going to happen in the future to those users and money and whatever. So really, all roads lead to that. I mean, however you look at it, it's all about the must-have experience.
Yeah. So if you're sort of taking your business into stages, first is about creating it in the first place, and then second is about stripping away all friction and getting as many people to that who sort of start the process to reach it. And then third is about plugging that into your market.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you about the intent of people coming to the site, because I've heard you speak about this before. How do you measure their intent when they get there? Because I can imagine intent kind of informing you about must-have experiences that maybe aren't there yet, but they wish they were, So does intent play into this right now?
I think intent is one of those things that is almost as an important asset as your must-have experience. So just in the world that growth hackers or marketers are dealing with, there's just so many choices out there for people, and there's so much competition for their attention. There's the numbers that I've heard are 3,000 advertisements a day that the average person sees. And so breaking through to people with your promise is just really hard. It's almost unrealistic on a startup budget to be the one who's going to create that advertisement that's going to get through versus companies that have, multi-million, hundreds of millions of dollars of budget channeling in to get people's attention. So intent is this asset that you have that you can leverage, which basically means that somebody has a need for something. It's that they're reaching out for information. So instead of bombarding them with all those messages every day, where as a coping mechanism they're blocking them out because their head would explode if they tried to process all 3,000 advertisements coming in. Intent is basically the outreach that if it's at all related to your product, then the art is figuring out how to connect that intent to your must-have experience. And you want to understand everything you can about that intent, and then ultimately if you can understand that and if you can connect it to your must-have experience in a way that doesn't just dismiss it. Again, I think so many marketers are so self-centered and focused on themselves that they're thinking, I have to find a way to jam this message at this person. But that if you truly understand what they're looking for, then you might be able to connect the dots to how your product promise can help deliver on that intent.
No, that's great. And you mentioned the word promise there, and I know that promises and hooks are a big part of your philosophy. So talk to us about promises and hooks. I mean, define them, and then how do you use them to bring people into that must-have experience?
Yeah, so an intent would be kind of on the hook side. So a promise is basically just the reflection of your must-have experience. It's the way that it's the promise of what your must-have experience will do for someone. So it's the way you're describing your must-have experience.
So are we talking a tagline here? I mean, is that the best way to think about it, or?
It can be, but I think it's more on a. I'd start with the kind of conceptual level, and then I would constrain the concept of what the promise that reflects that must-have experience. You can test 1,000 different ways to say that promise. So a tagline would be super consistent, but sometimes, depending on what the hook is or what someone's intent is, you need to wordsmith the promise so that it connects with their intent.
So there's kind of a platonic form of the promise, and it'll weave its way into your product in different ways.
Yeah. So probably the difference is that on the intent side, you can basically A/B test the heck out of intent and hooks, and you're not constrained at all.
Yeah.
It's whatever gets the highest response. That's great. But your promise, you're constrained to it having to reflect what the must-have experience is. So, maybe there's 1 million variations on the hook side, but there's only 1,000 on the promise side because you're just super constrained by it. Ultimately, if it's a false promise, then someone's going to get to the finish line and say, "This isn't what I thought it was. This sucks." And so ultimately, you have to be authentic to what you're promising, it has to actually be able to effectively deliver on that.
Gotcha.
And so then it's all about sort of setting the context so that that promise resonates with people. So if they have intent, so like one way of measuring intent would just be a Google search. So if somebody has searched Google for something specific, then you want to have a headline that's very related to whatever they searched. And then you want to have a way of wording the promise so that it is contextually relevant to whatever they searched.
Yeah.
But hopefully stays true to the promise and then maximize. So you might test 50 variations of combinations of the two to figure out how to maximize the number of people who ultimately go down and experience the must-have experience.
Yeah.
And so what you might have on the hook side might just be a restating of the intent of somebody's search, but a lot of times you don't have the benefit of intent to work with. So in that case, you might have a question mark that you lead with. So if you've got a weight loss product, you don't just have the promise of, lose 30 pounds in 30 days. You start with maybe a question that says, feeling fat, or something that maybe makes them say, like, actually, I am feeling fat. So now you've highlighted the problem in their mind so that the promise now can feed into that, and it can maximize the response on the
So you're
promise.
highlighting the problem without actually knowing the specific problem, because you're being just vague enough with a question that they'll fill in the blanks themselves and then receive your promise. Is that kind of what you're saying?
You do know the problem for your target users, and not everyone you reach with your message is going to be your target user. So you're trying to get the attention of your target users.
I got you.
So someone who's in really good shape is probably not going to respond to the feeling fat, but your target user might, now that you've got their attention and that sort of they're receptive to your promise, then you follow your promise afterwards.
Now, talk to me about optimizing flows, because like we said before, the whole goal is to get people to this must-have experience. And so what have been some of the ways that you found that are best to optimize the flow? Is there certain things you can do, certain things you don't do? What have you found to get people to that experience quicker that really works?
So what you want to do is actually understand what's preventing them from getting to that experience. So, like in one company that I worked with, we had the majority of people who signed up for the product from a certain channel. Apologies, but I'm getting calendar pops on my
That's all right.
So the majority of people who signed up for a channel or via a channel were not downloading the software. And so they would sign up and then they weren't downloading the software. And so one thing you can do with flows is just like A/B test a lot of different ways to try to encourage them to download the software, for example, just like in this case. And so you might make it more obvious that, click on this button, and maybe you make it a different color, maybe you make it bigger, maybe you say download the software, maybe you say next step, and you just try different ways there. But if you can actually get to the heart of the problem of why they're not downloading the software, then you're much more likely to come up with an experiment that is going to move the needle. So I had one company where we had a couple 100,000 people a day who were hitting the website. 10% of them were converting to a sign-up. So it's 20,000 people a day converting to a sign-up. This is through a new channel we had discovered. And then a 97% drop-off at the download step.
Oh, wow.
And A/B tested the heck out of trying to get more people to download, couldn't move the needle. But when we actually asked people, is anything preventing you from downloading the software at this point, we got the answer, I don't believe it's free. And so once we knew that the kind of offer was too good, then our next experiment actually tripled the download rate at that step, which made the channel viable. And what we actually did was we gave them a choice. We said, download free version of software, which we pre-checked with a big juicy check, like this is what we expect you to take, and then or download a trial of the paid version, $10 a month or $20 a month version. And when they saw there was a paid version, suddenly the free offer was credible, and a lot more people followed through with that channel. But I don't think we would have ever gotten there if we didn't actually know what was preventing them from downloading in the first place.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is ultimately map all the steps that it takes to get to your must-have experience, understand the motivation for following through with that step, and the fears or confusion and concern that prevent people from following through with that step, and then use both sets of information to drive a lot of testing.
Yeah. And one really succinct way that I've heard you put it before when you talk about these flows is desire minus friction equals conversion rate. I think that's such a well-said way to put it, because you have the desire, the intent, all those things, they're coming in. Just remove the friction, and you end up with a conversion rate of something. And all the things we've talked about is about removing that friction. Like in the example you just gave, the friction was... Go ahead.
In that formula, you also have the ability to increase the desire.
Mm-hmm.
So, really the two levers that you're working with are decrease friction, mm-hmm. which is going to get more people to the finish line, which is going to increase your conversion rate, mm-hmm. or increase desire. And that's really about momentum from the beginning. So getting better messaging, a better hook, a more powerful promise, mm-hmm. More customer testimonials, more maybe a video or something that sort of shows them that experience that just creates so much desire and momentum that I'll give you an example. I was booking a trip with Southwest not very long ago, and they had I think they were celebrating some kind of anniversary of something, but they said for the next 48 hours, all tickets are half price. And I fly every week on Southwest, and so half price tickets are a big deal for me. Mm-hmm. And so I basically went in to book 6 months of flights in advance, and to cut my travel costs in half for the next 6 months would have been awesome. Uh-huh. And so my desire was really strong. And I went through to book my ticket, and it timed out and failed. And I did it again, and it timed out and failed. And I did it again, and it timed out and failed. And there was so much friction, but my desire was so strong to do the transaction that I just kept going back. So my desire was strong enough that ultimately I picked up the phone, waited through a long queue of people, mm-hmm. got all the tickets, and got it all worked out. But it was, the fact that I was willing to pick up a phone because the transactions kept failing online, mm-hmm. meant that the promise had to be super strong that was motivating me to try to take advantage of the offer in the first place.
Yeah, that's a perfect example because it shows us those levers so clearly, desire and friction, and the conversion that actually happened afterwards. So the beginning of the pyramid is the product market fit. The middle piece of the pyramid, as we work our way up, is kind of the transition to growth, all the stuff we've been talking about. And then the last stage is scaling growth. What is different about this last stage, scaling growth, as opposed to transition to growth? Because actually, this is where my understanding gets fuzzy. I don't know if there is much of a difference, and if it is, I'm not sure what it is.
Sure. So scaling growth is basically, again, kind of like looking back at the shorter-term roles that I was taking, mm-hmm. and trying to kind of reverse engineer failure. Mm-hmm. So basically, I was saying, if nobody wants the product, I'm guaranteed to fail. Like I might be able to gain growth for a little while, but in the end, no one's going to use it. No one's going to pay for it. Like in the end, I'm not going to be successful. Mm-hmm. And then, so that's basically like that's like a just impossible growth situation long term. Mm-hmm. But then what you have with a lot of companies is it's just a really hard growth situation. Mm-hmm. And so with one company where I just in the early part of trying to figure out how to drive growth, I had a very leaky funnel. And in trying to drive that growth, I immediately went to the channels. And as I'm trying to drive that growth, I basically hit a wall and realized that I couldn't spend more than about $10,000 a month with a profitable, return on investment. Mm-hmm. All free channels were exhausted. There was just, I was basically wasn't growing at the pace that I wanted to be able to grow that company. But then I looked at a super leaky funnel and realized that I had skipped a lot of steps in sort of preparing for that growth. And I didn't really have the funnel to work with. I mean, the pyramid to work with at that point. Uh-huh. So it's kind of just making it up on the fly, and just realized that, gosh, we have such a hard growth situation. I want to go back and see if I can get more people to the must-have experience to mm-hmm. start the process. And so I spent about 4 months of working with the engineering team, working with the CEO, working with like all of us, this really focused effort. And we had this theory maybe early on that because it was downloadable software, maybe maybe this is really the fastest you can grow a downloadable software company.
Mm-hmm.
Then we looked at the IM companies, whether it was Skype or ICQ or
Mm-hmm.
some of the older ones that are out there, and they had tens of millions, hundreds of millions of users, and so now downloadable software you can grow. So then we thought, well, let's study how their installers work for these products, because clearly they've gotten there. So we spent a lot of time on the engineering team testing different installers and just trying to make the installation process as easy as possible. Mm-hmm. We figured out all of these different points in the funnel that people were dropping off. We experimented with the trial process, and when somebody signed up for a free version, did you start them on a trial of the premium or not? We did kind of all of these different tests that ultimately took a lot of effort and time, but we actually ended up getting about 1,000% higher rate of people who started the process, who successfully completed and purchased the product. Mm-hmm. So that meant that channels that I had previously tested and invested $1 and say I only got 50 cents back on the dollar. Mm-hmm. So that would be $1 I couldn't invest anymore. Now I invest that same dollar, I'm getting $5 back on $1 invested, because I've got all of that improvement through every step of the funnel. Mm-hmm. So when I went back and tested the exact same channels that previously had scaled to only $10,000, now I could spend over $1 million a month on the exact same channels driving growth, and that company took off from that point. So the transition to growth is basically you're trying to grow with one hand tied behind your back, 9 fingers taped, and you got one pinky that you're trying to figure out how to grow the business. Mm-hmm. You're ultimately building in, during this transition to growth phase, you're ultimately building in all of the advantages, stacking the odds so that when you do go out and start testing channels, that they're actually going to work.
I gotcha. So when you finally get to scaling growth, it's when both hands are not behind your back. You can dump in a lot more than $10,000 a month because you fixed the funnel, you made it have a massive return on the ROI. Now you're ready to really just pour fuel on the fire, right?
Exactly. It's not easy at that point. For most companies, it's still really hard to grow. Mm-hmm. It's just that you've made it significantly easier. It was nearly impossible mm-hmm. before, when you had a really inefficient conversion process. Mm-hmm. But you got a product that people love. You got a super efficient conversion process. You got the right pricing model. You've got all the right messaging. Mm-hmm. Now when you go out to the channels, you've basically completed that transition to growth. You've got that product market fit, and now you have the big challenge of figuring out, now how do I connect with my target customers in a way that I can cost effectively grow this business as quickly as possible. And obviously the most cost effective thing you can do is not have to spend money at all.
Exactly.
So really fast growing companies are able to find free ways to grow their business, and other companies, if there's nothing wrong with arbitrage, it's still free if you spend $1 and you make $2 back. Mm-hmm. It's not like that channel cost you anything. That channel made you money. Mm-hmm. But ultimately a lot of the paid channels are getting a lot harder, and that if you can come up with the right free channels, that they tend to have a lot more scale.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about those channels a little bit, and growth hacking kind of in general, because you famously coined the term growth hacker, like I said at the beginning, so we have to talk about that word for a moment here. You famously said that a growth hacker is a person whose true north is growth. What do you mean by that? Because there's been a lot of people try to define it after you.
Yeah, I think that ultimately I think kind of looking at the source of that word a little bit more, and why I thought it was important to coin a term. It's I don't do that all day long. So there was something behind it, and part of it was that I was getting equity in a bunch of these companies where I'd done these short-term 6-month roles, and then I was basically doing a lot of that. Stack the odds for growth was a lot of the work that I was doing, mm-hmm. and I needed to plug somebody in capable of taking the growth to the next level. And what I was finding is that the resumes of people that I was getting were very, very sort of cookie cutter marketing resumes. Mm-hmm. And when I looked around to see who was successfully driving growth at other companies, it wasn't your sort of traditional marketer. It wasn't the person who was spending a bunch of time on research reports and there's just a lot of kind of like jargony stuff that doesn't really move the needle that marketers kind of spend time doing, and a lot of that is just to kind of try to mystify it so that everyone else just, if growth happens, then they've applied some marketing magic to it, and if it doesn't happen, then they'll come up with some excuse like blaming sales. But I just didn't have a lot of faith in kind of that traditional marketing resume of skills, and so what I was trying to do was actually have a more constrained skill set. So if you look at your typical marketing book, it's a thick book. It's 1,000 pages plus, and in an early stage company that's just hitting the growth part, it's way simpler than that. It's just basically dollars spent, you need more dollars back, or free channels, you need to be able to invest in those. And a lot of times if you're investing in virality, you may not get a viral coefficient above 1, so you may not get something that basically self-propels the business to being huge, but you might get something that's gonna give you a 3x on every dollar you invest in other channels, because you've got really good sharing and user kind of mechanisms there. And it's really, to me, everything that a growth hacker does should be focused on how does this impact growth. And the typical marketer just was looking at a whole broader, how does it affect the brand? How does it affect, a bunch of just other crap that may or may not have a connection to growth. Maybe in the long term it does, but in an early stage startup or in just our early growth startup, you just don't have the luxury of thinking that much about the long term. It's about user acquisition and getting as many users to experience it, that must-have experience, and creatively making that happen, and understanding growth principles that tended to be a different set of principles than most marketers were working by. Marketers have the 4 Ps a lot of times that you would sort of see. There's just sort of kind of marketing hasn't changed a whole lot in the last 30 years, but marketing on the internet is a different beast, where you just have a lot more visibility into what's working and what's not working. It's very test oriented, and that if you focus on the levers that are most effective on the internet, you're going to be able to drive a lot more growth than if you sort of holistically try to approach it in a traditional marketing way.
Yeah, no, it's a great distinction there. Let's talk about some of those customer acquisition channels that maybe a marketer wouldn't think about, but a growth hacker does. I've seen you kind of list out in order, here's the channels you try to attack, and in this order for a reason. Walk us through these a little bit. First, you say viral channels. What do you mean by that?
So, I don't really have a particular, it might be an older presentation where I was just trying to give somebody a little, if I were them, this would be the kind of generic order in which I would try to approach this. But ultimately, I'll come back to the question of what I mean by viral in a minute. But ultimately, I think to effectively drive growth, you need to understand what's unique about each situation and what are the channels that are going to be uniquely able to serve that situation. And so, like on that list that I showed before, probably had things like SEO and SEM and things like that on the list. But if you have a product that people have the pain, but they aren't aware that even a solution exists, there will be no search demand for the product. Like so that ultimately you need to really think about does the product have some collaborative functionality in it that just like LinkedIn. If you're the only person on LinkedIn, it's not very valuable. That ultimately it is all collaboration. You're basically posting your resume for other people to see it, and you're looking at other people's resume, and they build in all these sort of interactions in between. Who's viewed my profile? Who, comment on this? Recommend this person. Now they've got vouch for their skills, whatever their endorse their skills, I guess is. They're all about kind of really understanding what's unique and building an interaction that drives retention and growth a lot more. How do I invite all my friends to see my LinkedIn profile now that I've spent all this time on it? How do I spam my email so that it's not just I think they were one of the first to do hooks into Outlook for being able to upload your Outlook address book, and similar type approach was taken with Facebook. That ultimately, there's a lot of kind of gamey things that you can do. One thing that I would also kind of take a step back and say is that organic growth is a really powerful form of growth as well. And if you have a great product that meets a need, and you have really low friction on the sign up, and you have a powerful promise and hook, then your organic growth is actually going to be probably pretty strong, even without any external channels. And that's something that we saw at Dropbox. That's something that we saw at Eventbrite. We saw it at a lot of these companies where when the product is just so good and meets a need for people, word of mouth is by far your most powerful channel that's out there. Gotcha. But when you can also promote the event that you just created in Eventbrite, like push it out on Facebook and other sorts of things, when you can take advantage of making sure that it's covered by the search engines, when you can minimize sharing friction. I mean, one of the things that I just saw on Dropbox recently is that is just a great example, and this is just me as an outside observer who hasn't been involved with the company for a long time, so there's no sort of company secret here, but when I save a file now and click on my little Dropbox icon up in the top, it says, here's the last 3 files that you've saved, and then if you hover over it, it says create share link. So they've really reduced friction to create a share link that is going to definitely increase the likelihood that I'm sharing. And I was already doing it before, but now it's so easy, I'm going to think about doing it a lot more. So you combine strong word of mouth with all of these kind of built-in functionality to drive sharing and collaboration and things like that, and really kind of leveraging what's unique about the product. So with my company, we follow a similar approach to what YouTube used, that basically as people use our product, a lot of them have a survey by Qualaroo or powered by Qualaroo, and others see it out there, click on that link, and it drives a conversion. That's how YouTube grew as well. That the more that people uploaded videos, they made it really easy to then embed those videos in lots of places, and then it just kind of drove that cycle of sharing. So that's really kind of what I mean by focusing on virality, and also by focusing on what's uniquely relevant for the company. Like Log Me In didn't really have much in the way of sort of natural virality to it. It was much more of a solo experience. I'm installing it on my computer to remotely control a different computer. But now they have Join.me, which is an online meeting product that is much more of a viral driver. So that was part of they came out with that after I left, but that was probably part of their product roadmap. And even coming out with that is that, gosh, if we can have a very viral product that goes out and captures market share, and then cross promote our other products that have been proven to satisfy users and retain and monetize users, it's a really good combination.
Yeah, and as you think about the customer acquisition channels, do you think it's fair to say that, obviously you have to make it unique to your business, so you can't just go and try to be viral if your product isn't viral, right? But after you've kind of decided what works with your product, would you say focus on the free stuff first, then focus on the paid stuff, and then focus on kind of the Hail Mary passes of let's interrupt people randomly when they're on the internet and see if we can create demand from nothing? Is that kind of the 1, 2, 3 in terms of the order you would look at?
Yeah, so I mean, I think any of the free things that you can do, particularly the viral things, are going to add leverage to other channels that you get to work. So if each person basically tells 0.7 additional people, then everyone you pay to acquire, actually you're bringing in 3.5 people, so you're able to amortize that dollar across multiple people. So it makes sense to do that first. because paid channels that wouldn't have worked, now they only need to be a third as effective as they were before to work. So you're just, again, stacking the odds before those paid channels will work.
Yeah.
The reason I like to start with search before I start with demand generation, you could kind of look at it either way. The problem with search is that it's constrained by the number of people that are searching. So it's a constrained channel that you can never have more than 100% of the people that are searching for something relevant to what your product is. So even if you crack it, you don't have sort of that unlimited growth potential. So for example, compare that to, say, radio. If you figure out how to get radio to work in one market, that you can spend $50 acquiring a user through radio, and that user's worth $100, you can repeat that in every radio market across the country, and you have a super scalable channel that's really creating demand for your product. But demand harvesting tends to be a lot easier, and it's good to, if they don't find you, then they're probably going to find an alternative or a competitor, or you're making room for a competitor. So you want to make sure that you sort of cut off access to those people to all other alternatives, and funnel as many of those people into your solution. And so it makes sense to kind of cover that early on, even if it doesn't tend to be particularly scalable. I wouldn't obsess on making that channel work if there's not a lot of upside to it, though. So if you try to make it work, and then you realize that in the best scenario with the volume of search that's related to your product, you might get 2 people a day when you're already getting 1,000 people a day. It's just not worth spending weeks and weeks trying to figure it out if it's not going to move the needle in your business.
Yeah, at the heart of it, like you said before, it's growth, and so we have to use common sense. What's going to actually grow when we look back at all of our activity? Now let's talk about Qualaroo a little bit. This is your new startup, new-ish. It's been around for a little bit now, but it hasn't been public for very long. So what is Qualaroo? What does it do?
So Qualaroo is basically, it's a lot of stuff that I've kind of talked about, a lot of stuff that's sort of at the heart of how I approach things. It started as a way to engage live users on your website, to ask them what they're trying to do, what problems that they're having, and to be able to target very specific users at very specific stages in your conversion funnel to really gather the information that you would then use to drive A/B tests. So that's kind of at the base of where the product started. That's still how the majority of our customers use it now. It's a little question that pops up in the corner of the website. You can time it so it pops up a minute onto visiting this page, or 10 seconds onto visiting this page, or immediately, and you're really just getting that understanding of what's going on. You can also put it in products, so we use it for people who are accessing their dashboard on the product to ask like the must-have question, and how would they feel if they couldn't use it anymore, and what would they use instead? And so you can engage your if it's a web-based product, you can engage your really passionate users as well, and try to drill down. But I think the unique advantage is really in the on-ramping and flows, and that's really our Qualaroo Insights product, and that's what we've been doing for the last year, and it's got a pretty big user base. And then our Qualaroo Convert product is much more about taking that information and helping to drive value for the user through the interaction. So if you uncover that they're looking for something that will help them do X, and let's say you've got an e-commerce site, then you can actually give them a call to action screen that tells them, we've got something that will do that, click here to go there, or you can auto redirect them, or you can serve a lead gen form based on. So I use it for special offers for people who have the right profile. I'll give them a special offer for answering a few questions, and then I drive half my leads just through answer 3 questions for 50% off, and I actually don't really care that much about the answers to those questions, but the fact that they felt like they needed to work to get that 50% discount, they're much more likely to take advantage of it, and I've been able to generate a lot more leads for my sales team. We're really in the early stages of that product, where we're evolving a lot more different form sizes, and it's all about, and there'll be more automated things, but it's all about really driving the desired actions and empowering a marketer to do all those things on their own. So a once you have the code on your site, it takes a couple minutes to get on there. Then the marketer has the ability to deploy these sorts of interactions anywhere on their site and kind of understand what's going on and drive more people to the goals you're trying to get.
And so when they log into Qualaroo and they kind of connect these funnels, if they say this, do this. If they want this, send them here. That's all automated. It's not an operator on the other end telling them what to do. It's completely automated funnel based once you set it up.
Yeah, so we have an editor where you just map different answers to different actions or to follow-on questions, and then you can just kind of set it and forget it. And you can even use, we integrate with a bunch of the chat products so that you can not waste your time chatting with people who aren't qualified to go through a set of qualification questions and then prompt an OLARC chat or different types of chats.
I got you. So is Qualaroo kind of when people don't have a Sean Ellis on staff, they install Qualaroo and it gives them a little bit of Sean Ellis in their company? Is that kind of what this is?
I mean, the fact that I rely on it a lot too. I think it's it's just like anything else. It's only as good as the person on the other end. That you still need to be creative. It's just that. I get excited about tools like Optimizely and Unbounce and Kissmetrics and things that I used to be really reliant on other people within my company to do things that now when I want to do them, I can create a landing page. I can edit a live page with Optimizely and publish that change as an A/B test and start to do all the things that used to take me lots of pain on begging people to help me with things. And even when I had people who were capable of doing those things, on the marketing team, I generally had an engineering team who said, no. we're not trusting marketing touching the live site to do these sorts of things. So, the tools that are out there now, the fact that, in the past I had DBAs on my team to run queries. Now with Kissmetrics, I can post information. Like once the information's already in there, I can build the funnels afterwards to get a true understanding of what's happening and pull down exactly the users who've done action X and this and being able to pull down that list of emails and give it to my sales team and things that would have been impossible a few years ago. It's just so great to have these tools that empower you. And I think Qualaroo basically fits in there where it gives you that qualitative understanding primarily right now, but increasingly gives you the ability to act on that information and enhance a user's experience on your website in these kind of automated programs that you can set up. And so we've been on a hot tier. We're 25% month over month growth for every month since January, which is if you kind of do the math. It's basically a 300% increase in monthly revenue since January.
Well, I have to ask. How? I mean, what's some of the things you're doing there? I mean, I'm sure you're just taking your own advice, everything you've said so far, but is there anything you point to that you haven't talked about yet of like, well, we did this and it's really working?
Well, one of the things that I talked about earlier is that organic growth is something that, when you do the first two steps in the pyramid, organic growth is something that really can be an important driver in a business. And that I would say that right now, that's a big part of what's driving us forward is just product improvements, better, reduction of friction. But when you really boil down our attribution, so much of it is through our powered by link, through branded searches. 97% of our searches in Google are for Qualaroo branded searches. So that means there's strong word of mouth around the product because it's delivering our promise for people. It's word of mouth and blogs and press we're kind of rounded out right now, and we didn't get to the drive growth stage until last month. So we haven't actively been trying to experiment with channels until May 1st, and so we've got a lot of different tests that are in the pipe. Retargeting has been working really well for us. So that's one thing that we find is that it does take multiple visits to drive a conversion. And so being able to stay top of mind for people. But I would say still that we have we have at least another doubling in conversion rate through funnel optimization that we still need to do. And so part of it, like it's not always so cut and dry as like, okay, stop this step and move on to the next step. It's sometimes different resources, but I think our conversion funnel is efficient enough that we can focus on driving growth, but there's still lots of room for improvement in enhancing conversions as well.
Yeah, and now not only have you brought in 25% month over month for the last few months, you also really increased retention as well. I read recently you guys, tell me if I'm wrong, went from 60% retention to almost 90% retention. Is that right, first of all?
Yeah, I mean, that was in our most recent cohort, so that's just looking at it on a cohort level after month 3.
Yeah.
We were really bad at retaining, and so and that's a product market fit indicator to a large degree. And so until we got the product right, so basically one of the big changes that we made in February was that we launched this branching logic. So before that, it was flat screen, just single question, and now you can have so many like different choose your own adventure paths based on digging deeper and getting to the kernel of some information in a question process, and then ultimately serving an action on the back end of that. And basically then from about that time that our retention cohort shot way up. So I would mostly credit product on that.
Gotcha.
And that's great. That's what you want, is because it's so much more authentic and sustainable in the growth when good organic growth is being driven off of a great product. But now I am obsessive about finding new channels to drive growth even faster, and we've got some awesome stuff teed up that I think we'll be putting out within the next couple of months. So keep an eye on it. I don't want to talk about it yet because some of it's going to work and some of it won't. But we're investing in things that I think have a lot of potential, and but that's ultimately it's about being persistent and just velocity of testing and intelligence of what you're testing, and just putting out a pretty good testing schedule. And I've got a guy on the team that's able to put a lot more focus on growth than I had, who's really strong. And so basically once we're got kind of the right process in place, and then you never know what's going to bite and what's not going to bite, but you just got to keep being pretty tenacious about testing things.
Yeah. Well, Sean, this has been an absolutely incredible interview. Even though it took us a long time to get you on, it was well worth it. I have one final question for you, and you've covered this so many different ways already, but if you had to say, what's the best advice that you can give to any startup that's trying to grow?
I would say that CEO can't outsource, can't just abdicate growth. That so much of the upside in the startup is tied to its ability to grow, and so much of that upside is owned by a founder CEO that they would be crazy to outsource it and trust somebody else. That if there's anything that you can see from the growth hacker movement itself, is that the profile of someone who can effectively drive growth is not necessarily someone who's got 30 years of traditional marketing experience. That it's really the profile of someone who's passionate about getting a great solution into the hands of the people who need it, and particularly if it's a founder who's got an engineering background, they could play a huge role in driving that forward, and they just have so much to gain from it. That would be my biggest advice, is that it should be a partnership between the founder, founder CEO, the entire team should really be focused on being excited and passionate about getting the experience out there, and that you should hopefully have the right type of person leading the charge who kind of fits that growth hacker profile that so many of us have tried to define and capture.
Well, Sean, that is incredible advice to end on. Again, thank you so much for coming on Growth Hacker TV.
All right, thanks for having me.